Katie, and I'd like to welcome you back to this, our final session of the day, and what I think will be a really interesting discussion. We've had a wonderful day up to now where we've had fantastic stories about women in STEM. Now in this session, we're going to look at where we are in relation to women in STEM, what are the issues, what we need to do, and how we need to get there. I'm delighted that Jocelyn has kindly agreed to stay with us for this panel discussion, and we're now also joined by Dr. Eucharia Meehan from the Dublin Institute of Advanced Studies and Dr. Ruth Freeman from Science Foundation Ireland. Eucharia is the CEO and Registrar of the Dublin Institute of Advanced Studies, and Ruth is currently Director of Science and Society in Science Foundation Ireland. Can I ask if anyone does have any questions or comments for the panelists, you could put them in the chat. I'm sure there will be plenty, and I'll direct them then to the panel. You've all heard about Jocelyn's background, so first I'd like to ask Ruth first, and then maybe Eucharia, if you could just tell us a little bit about your career and what motivated you to study science.
Oh, and first, thank you so much for inviting me to be here, Sheila. It's a real privilege to be here on the panel with you and Jocelyn and Eucharia. So look, I mean, I've always was a curious child. I was one of those kids that was obsessed with David Attenborough and the natural world, and I kind of always wanted to know why things happened, and I always liked figuring things out. And I suppose those was the things that brought me into science. And you know, for me, I might have mentioned it to you earlier, I didn't have a great sort of physics instruction, or I never connected really with physics at school. But when I got to college, even though I went on to study genetics, I remember suddenly going to physical chemistry classes and sort of these clickings of understandings around the periodic table and elements. And I kind of remember walking around going, it's amazing that not everybody knows this. Like, this is just so incredible. So I obviously worked in research for a while and in genetics, which I absolutely loved, but then got an opportunity to work in research funding, which is what I do now, and I have done for nearly 15 years. And you know, this gives me amazing opportunities to support researchers at all stages of their careers, but also to work on programs that are in public engagement, education. So I sort of see it as a real privilege to just be involved in this world and then be constantly dealing with scientists who are pushing that boundary of knowledge, because I guess ultimately it's that curiosity, problem solving, wanting to make an impact that brings us into science. So that's a whistle-stop tour.
Thanks. And Eucharia, if you could just fill us in a little bit about your career and what got you into science.
Sure. I had a slightly different start to Ruth, in that up until the end of my fourth year, the year before leaving cert, I was on a trajectory to do history and languages. And quite shockingly to my mother, who is a historian, I decided in the summer before my leaving cert to drop history and to take up chemistry. Because at that time, there was actually a lot in the media and a bit of a push around the whole area of medical research and medical technology. And I got it into my head that that's the area I wanted to go into. So I quickly changed over to science. So it was a very different sort of a trajectory there. But I think once I got into it then, did obviously the basic degree, PhD in pharmacology, and then I moved to do medical research in the private sector in a company with Elan Corporation. And I suppose a point in time came where, and this is something where maybe in terms of what we're going to be talking about with women in careers, at that time, a point came where I could see that actually in terms of getting promoted, one really was going to have to go more into administration and managerialism. And that's where I went, but retaining very much a strong link with research and science by managing large projects and that kind of thing. A point in time came then where unexpectedly I was notified, I suppose, about a position at the Higher Education Authority in terms of managing a large program called the PRTLI. It was a new role. And cut a long story short, I basically ended up moving from the private sector into the public sector. And since that time, I haven't looked back really. I managed that program for a long time, 10 years, was at the HEA. Then when the government decided to merge two former research funding councils into one council, I became the inaugural director of that council. And then most recently, I think as Ruth's boss famously said publicly, I went from a gamekeeper to poacher by moving across to the Dublin Institute for Advanced Studies. So going into a situation where I was very much now looking for funding and very much running research directly and helping the performance of research in that way, as distinct from actually being on the government side of the table. So quite a different trajectory, but it's been fun, I can tell you that.
Okay, so yeah, interesting stories. Ruth, I'm just wondering, we're always hearing headlines in the papers about, you know, problems about the numbers of women in STEM. I mean, is there really an issue, and is it across all STEM, or do you have any insights in that?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, it's a big question, and it is nuanced clearly, because you know, except maybe for one thing, there's definitely not enough women in leadership in science. So I think we can be pretty clear that that's evident, and whether that's in the private sector or the number of sort of, you know, senior professors in academia, there's certainly a deficit in women pretty much across the board. But it's a complex thing, and I think it starts very early, and then there's probably small barriers that sort of are more significant for women than for men the whole way through, kind of from early childhood all the way through. So, I mean, certainly, you know, we know that in Ireland, you know, some girls' schools don't even offer the full suite of science subjects, so there may be an access issue there. We know that, you know, certainly when it comes to teaching some subjects, that the way the curriculum has actually been designed may not appeal in the same way to young women as it does to young men. So I think that's one side that we see at the education level. We know then because we've done research on college choices. So we surveyed around 3,000 students, and we asked them why they had picked the course they had picked. Now, some of them had gone into science courses, some had gone into non-science courses. But the biggest factor, the overriding factor for all of them, was that they thought they would fit in with the other people on the course. And of course, that makes you think, who else do they think is doing that course? And then why do they think they're like that person? So that brings us to the whole issue of stereotypes and, you know, what do people perceive scientists to be like? Now, having said that, you know, we still do see, when you look at general science courses, that there's a lot of girls. You know, the points have gone up in Ireland for science courses, and girls generally are still doing better at the Leaving Cert, so they are getting into those courses. But for those that choose to stay on in science, you know, that typical sort of scissors diagram where you see them dropping out kind of maybe after the PhD and postdoc. I mean, again, it's complex. Some of the issues are ones that are faced by women across society, but we all know there's short contracts. There's issues around potentially having to travel and combine that with caring responsibilities that impact on women more. So, you know, there's a whole range of it, you know, and I'm sure others would want to come in as well, because we could almost spend the whole time just talking about this. But I mean, I think there are real issues, and they're not evenly distributed, and they don't all affect everyone. But you know, there can be a bit of a death by 1,000 cuts when you go from beginning to end.
When we started putting this panel together, we thought it'd be interesting to see what the audience's views were on perceptions of, say, barriers to women in science. So we actually asked people registering, did they think there was more barriers to women in STEM than in other careers? And we actually found there was 60% of the people attending the summer school actually thought that there were more barriers to women in STEM than in other careers. But what was interesting is that 59% of women thought there was more barriers, or there were more barriers to women in STEM, but 63% of men thought there were more barriers to women than in other careers, which I think is quite interesting. And 37% of women thought there was no difference, whereas 30% of men thought there was no difference. So I just think that's an interesting idea. Jocelyn, you're in the physics world, which is very, I suppose, stereotypically described as being more, I suppose, male. would you think that there are more issues or more barriers to women in STEM than in other careers? Or is STEM getting a bad name because of this?
I think it's partly STEM getting a bad name, but I think actually the issues go back much, much, much earlier. Think about, well, do you have the phenomenon of pink princesses in Ireland? Have you looked at the words advertisers use to describe toys for boys and toys for girls? There's a wonderful website here called Let Toys Be Toys. I don't know whether I could show a copy of that. Can I share a screen? One slide.
Yeah.
Let's see how I do this. I think maybe the technology is going to defeat me. I will read some of the words. Guess which gender these toys are for. Adventure, control, battle, power, action, amazing, explore, blast, build. And which gender are these toys for? Beautiful, fun, magic, princess, hair, accessories, glitter, style, fashion. We gender our kids incredibly early. That comes from this website, Let Toys Be Toys. And I think that's the kind of campaign we've got to have. Stop the females being labeled as little pretty diligent princesses. That's not a research scientist.
Absolutely. Actually, Channel 4, I don't know, they did a great documentary where they took a group of 7-year-olds in school and they degendered everything about the classroom. And they studied them for 3 or 4 months, and it's absolutely fascinating because they filmed them before, and even unconsciously the teacher was using different language with the boys and the girls, and he didn't even realize he was doing it until it was played back to him. And it was amazing. I mean, actually, one thing they tested was things like the girls' ability on things like tangram puzzles, maths, and it actually improved just because they changed the way they thought about things. So I fully agree, Jocelyn, we've got to start right there.
But that's a huge societal change.
Yeah.
And you've got to shift all the toy manufacturers.
And I suppose it plays out further than even, you know, I mean, that carries on then right the way through. I mean, in terms of specifically around STEM and engineering, I mean, there's some, you know, really fascinating data out there as well in terms of programming, you know, whether it's childhood programming, or whether it's even programming for adults, in terms of how engineers, IT people, scientists are portrayed, how many of them are male and female. And, you know, typically there are very few female role models in science, engineering, IT portrayed in children's programming, or indeed in adult programming, because I think parents as well have, you know, a key role here, and we all have unconscious bias. So parents as well obviously are subject to that sort of societal messaging. So it's a large topic, large challenge.
They actually say children are gendered maybe before they're born, certainly as soon as they're born. Parents will handle boy babies more robustly than they will handle girl babies, for example.
Is that one of the issues when we're like talking to girls, you know, in terms of encouraging girls to do science? I mean, in a lot of cases, we're saying, you know, there were problems with the numbers of girls doing science, so you should do science. So it's very negative in the promotion. I mean, I'm just thinking back of when in the Big Bang, when Sheldon and the guys go to talk to a girls' school about encouraging girls to do science. And Sheldon talks about the amazing work of Marie Curie, and then ends up saying, you know, but then her hair fell out and her teeth fell out. And if you work really hard, you can be just like her. So, I mean, is the messaging all wrong to girls? Should we be, you know, showing the positives as opposed to saying, you know, there's a problem, so we need you to get involved?
Yeah. I mean, I guess I work a lot in public engagement science, so I think about this thing a lot. And, you know, I've had on a bad day, you know, maybe when you hear one of those, the Nature report about things like bullying and harassment in science, you kind of go, is it even ethical for me to encourage girls into workplaces where maybe they're not going to be, you know, treated as they should be? But I think you have to step back to the hugely significant role that science and STEM plays in all of our lives. I mean, it has a big impact on all of us, and the way technology is progressing will impact on our futures. So I think there's a question here, you know, we need a diversity of voices in science. I mean, people have a right to be involved in these discussions. So we have to talk about how fascinating it is. We have to talk how important it is. And, you know, I think, Jocelyn, in your talk today, I saw people on the chat saying they wanted, you know, young girls to hear this, because I think, you know, you captured the ups and the downs, but the passion and you know, all of it came through as well. So we also need to talk about the fun and the upsides and how important this is.
I think, yeah, I think you're absolutely right there, Ruth. We need to emphasize more the fun and the you know, the interesting domain science is. And I think, I suppose, going back to my earlier point, I think the whole area of role models and having positive role models. So it's both portraying, I suppose, the fabulous work that goes on in science, how important it is in a very general way, whether it's to males or females. But also, I think it's important that we then have, you know, it's fabulous. Jocelyn does such great work, actually, you know, talking about her career and showing that passion. But we need more of that coming out through different stage careers, through different domains. So, I mean, you know, the phrase is, you cannot be what you cannot see. So if people girls aren't seeing, I suppose, the role models in their own domain. And if they're not seeing it in the media, we have to find ways for the role models to be visible, because I think there is evidence that shows that actually, if that actually happens and people do have those sort of positive engagements, they do actually change their mind. I mean, this is not a scientific story, but I think this point really was reinforced to me about 10 years ago. I actually attended a launch of, it was actually a PRTLI centre in Trinity College. And afterwards, a girl came up to me who, and I'll never forget it, because you kind of it really demonstrates how you can really impact on people. And she said to me, she said, I decided to take up science. She said, after I heard you speaking at a role model event organized by Women in Technology and Science, WITS, about 10 years prior to that. And she said, the enthusiasm you had for your work, she said, I decided I was going to do science. So I think that was just one instance, but I've heard of loads of other instances where that actually happens. So getting that kind of engagement is absolutely critical, whether it's in the media or in a one-to-one or whatever way that can be done.
I'm just wondering, is that unique to STEM? I mean, like, do people in other sectors need role models as well? And I'm just wondering, like, say when women do go into STEM, are they treated any differently than women in other disciplines like law or accounting? But yet it's STEM that seems to have the headlines of problems of women in the sector. And you never hear about headlines, or very rarely with the same of, you know, we've low numbers of women in law or accounting or things like that.
I think the first part of your question about if I may, sorry, jump in around the stereotype. I think there are a lot of models, you know, role models in the media and that for women in law, women in medicine, women in other areas. I think that the research shows that actually in the media there are a lot less role models for science, technology, IT. So I think there is a particular issue there, and there is research there that actually shows that. In terms of when they actually go into the careers, then that part of your question, in terms of the data and the information seems to show that actually from the point of view of progression, obviously women, there are general societal issues around progression for women, the glass ceiling. And there's mixed data there in terms of that. It seems to be a better situation in the private sector than it is, for example, in academia, and Ruth's already referred to that earlier. But one of the things that does concern me, and I hate being negative because we do want to actually portray, I suppose, the positive sides of being in STEM. I mean, one of the worrying things is the most recent data from the European Commission that shows that it mixed with CSO data is that there is still a pay gap generally between men and women, regardless of what area you work in, of something like 13–14%. But if you actually look at STEM roles, if you take out the STEM roles, the difference is much greater. There's a 30% difference. So I think there are still, I think it tends to be very individual, but I think in general, I think there still are some barriers there, which really come back to the stereotyping and come back to what societal expectations are as to what women do, what men do, that result in this big pay gap. So I do think that is still an issue. I don't know how the others feel.
Yeah, I mean, certainly when you look at the way science has traditionally been measured and sort of the traditional publishing outputs, I think it can be quite sort of relentless. And certainly we've moved in SFI to using narrative type CVs that don't just look at absolute numbers of publications, that try to, I suppose, better understand someone's contributions and their thoughts in a field, as opposed to just the number of papers they've published, or those maybe metrics where we see women are more challenged, particularly if they have taken any time out. But certainly, again, coming back to that data, that paper that was published in Nature either last year or the year before, looking at, I suppose, again, this is focused on academia, the type of maybe controls and governance that you would expect to prevent things like sexual harassment, maybe not having been fully thought through previously in academia. When you think about things like, field trips, the apprenticeship model of a PhD, where someone can be in quite a vulnerable position. I mean, I think a lot of that is improving now, which is great. But I certainly think historically those things have maybe not been optimal for women in science.
Sorry, Jocelyn, do you want to come in there?
Yep. The Hubble telescope that you've probably heard of, a facility that you can apply to get time on, was having a serious problem with too few women being successful. And they have introduced what's known as double-blind refereeing. If you want to use a telescope like this, you write a case and another person referees it, comments on it. And they were discovering that women's applications were getting refereed more severely than male ones. So they now have introduced a system whereby your name is detached from your proposal, your application, and equally the referee's name is unknown to you. And this is what they call a double-blind system. And it's resulted in a hugely increased number of women getting time on the Hubble Space Telescope.
Yeah, and Jocelyn, we've done the same, that whole women being scored more harshly. We've introduced some things, as I call it, we tip the playing field to level it, because it's not level in the beginning. So what we've done, we've done a number of things. So in some of our programs, we do have quotas for the number of applications that can come in from any one institution. And sometimes what we will say is, you can put in 10 applications, but if you're putting in equal numbers of men and women, you can put in 20. So what we do is we essentially push the institutions to find more female applicants. Now, once all the applications come in, they're reviewed equally, because actually when it's a full grant proposal, we find it quite hard to detach the CV entirely, because obviously even the proposal can identify the person. But that goes to 50-50 success rate once you push the institutions to find more women to put forward. So that's one thing we're doing. And the other thing we're doing is exactly as you say, because we know that women are scored more harshly across all review. If two proposals score equally, we fund the woman first, because we know essentially she has worked harder to get that same score. Now, in doing that, we've pushed our proportion of female grant holders up to 27%. Our initial goal about 3 years ago was 25%. We've now pushed that goal to 35%, and we will continue to use these kind of, as I call them, we'll tip it back up to level it methodologies.
Yeah, good. Interesting to hear. Thank you.
I think that these are all really positive moves, and definitely moving in the right direction. We just have a comment from Nuala Clark to say that the representation of women artists in the National Gallery of Ireland collection is worse than it was. So it seems to me that there's lots of work to be done in many sectors, and not just in the STEM sector, but I think it's reassuring to see that things are moving, you know, in the right direction with these moves. So the future is looking brighter, you know, in that.
Yeah, I think, Sheila, come back to your question. I mean, if we look at I suppose if we look at the genesis of a lot of the work that has been done in the whole area of women in STEM, I mean, there's a number of drivers there. I mean, when I came into the public sector out of the private sector, so that was back in the 90s. You know, there was this is when the really big push around increasing the numbers of girls and women in STEM really started, and a lot of that was driven, like, if we're honest about it, was driven by you know, a view that we needed more people in STEM in the workforce, and therefore we needed to up the numbers in STEM, and we needed to up the numbers of women also. And then there was also obviously the driver around providing equal opportunities to boys and to girls to, you know, to do what they wanted to do, and there shouldn't be any barrier. But there was a dual, you know, two different drivers there. So I think that's one of the reasons. I mean, go back to your earlier question, Sheila, I just was thinking about it there, you know, why we do hear so much about women in STEM. Because, you know, there is, because, you know, science, I mean, Ruth referred to this earlier, you know, science underpins so many things. It's such an important component of all our lives. It's such an important driver for the whole economy. So therefore, there is a really big policy interest in this, in addition to it being almost like an equality of opportunity issue. So I think that's one of the reasons we do hear so much about it. I was just trying to think about that question you answered earlier, or asked earlier. So, but I think that does bring with it certain challenges in how we approach it, and how we drive it, and how we talk about it.
I suppose one of the issues, I'm wondering if say women are aren't maybe as interested in science, so many laws and things like that are going to, and particularly now as we move forward, they're going to have a scientific basis. Things like gene therapy and personalized medicine. Are we in danger of, you know, making bad laws if we don't have the views of women being, I suppose, as out there as men?
Yeah, I mean, I think if we don't have broad views when we look at, you know, creating laws for the whole of society, you know, we certainly will miss things. And, you know, I always found it was really fascinating. I mean, my background is genetics, and it's interesting that you referred to genomics there, because, you know, for me, that's a whole area that is now going to be more of a feature of medicine and things over the next decades, despite maybe a slower start than some had thought, you know, back when the human genome was first sequenced. But, you know, there is going to have to be debate about how we want to manage that. I mean, at the moment, you have a situation in Ireland where you can go and get your genome sequenced by a private company. You can get that information back. I mean, you could have your children's genome sequenced if you wanted to, but there's no real basis there for a lot of people to frame that information. You know, we haven't had the discussion about what that means, or what kind of interventions we might be prepared to tolerate as a society, or we might actively want and encourage. And that is a debate that needs to include all voices, because, you know, if we want to move together as a society that is cohesive and not just create divisions, I mean, we can't just sort of have those that have the information and those that don't, and a huge divide between them. I mean, I think we've learned from the whole sort of discussions around vaccinations that just by sort of shouting at people and telling them that you're right and they're wrong doesn't really tend to move the dial in terms of getting people to understand or reach a consensus. And in fact, being generous with sharing information. And I mean, again, coming back to Jocelyn's presentation here, I mean, I'm sure it takes huge, effort for her to give a presentation that so many people can understand. I mean, she's actively opening the door to the world of pulsars as opposed to just saying, well, it's here, but if you don't understand it, that's your problem. And I think as scientists, we all need to do that. We need to open the door and say to people, this is actually accessible. And not only is it accessible, I will help make it accessible for you. I will invite you in, and then I will talk to you about it. And actually, you will probably be fascinated too. So it is about making it more of a constructive dialogue and actually encouraging people to come in, and with that excitement and fun as well,
I agree around that. That making science accessible is incredibly important, and Jocelyn is obviously absolutely fabulous at it. So that not everybody needs to be scientifically literate to actually understand what's going on, and it is important that scientists communicate. But I do think, actually, just going back to your question about will we end up making bad laws, for example, if particular if there isn't that scientific literacy there. I think it is important that we do increase scientific literacy in general, whether that's more formally through the education system or by scientists reaching out more and actually communicating and talking to people. And I think, again, the sessions, but like what we do next in terms of women in STEM, I think, again, for a role like that, I mean, but both myself and Ruth are in roles where we're using our scientific qualifications, but we wouldn't probably be classified anymore as in STEM roles, but actually we wouldn't be able to do our roles without actually having had our grounding in science, or certainly we wouldn't be able to do them maybe as well as we do them. So I think there is a thing around, again, how we actually talk to people about what science roles are, particularly to girls, in terms of, it isn't the stereotype, always standing in a lab at a bench, that there is a huge variety of different roles and paths one can go down if one goes into science. And I still think that actually we're still not being successful, I think, in communicating that. And going back to the language thing again, Sheila, I think sometimes there's quite negative language around maybe people who don't stay necessarily doing research or a very direct scientific role. I mean, someone said to me in a panel once, yes, but you're lost to science. It's almost like I'm part of some kind of a brain drain, and I kind of go, I don't see it like that. So I think we do need to, we do need scientists themselves as well, need to be more inclusive, almost in terms of recognizing that other people who actually have science in their background that are doing particular roles are still part of that community. So I think there's I'm throwing that down as a bit of a challenge as well, I suppose, to people who consider themselves as scientists. That I see as all as scientists, actually, if we've come out of that stable initially.
I mean, yeah, I'm just wondering, do we need to change the whole messaging about science? And, if there are all these barriers to girls, why are we encouraging girls, or should we be encouraging girls to get into science and the whole STEM area if there are, all these barriers? And do we need to change the messaging that we're giving to everybody, including girls, about it?
I think the messaging is changing. I mean, okay, I'm not in Ireland. I think we are taking more care, bar the advertisers who sell toys.
Yeah, I mean, sorry, Justin.
One of the things I do sometimes, I do quite a lot of speaking, and one of the topics I talk on is astronomy and poetry. And it is noticeable that when I do talks on astronomy and poetry, my audience contains a much larger fraction of women than a straight science talk. So there are ways in, ways.
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly, I know that there's been examples of degree courses that had very, very low uptake of women to those courses, particularly in computer science areas. And when the title of the course was changed, perhaps something like computer science for biomedical engineering or computer science for medicine, you know, that even that makes it more tangible, and that sense of an impact that attracted more women to those courses. So I agree. I think the language is improving, but I mean, again, coming back to your point, should we encourage more diverse groups of people into science? I mean, we must have diverse groups of people in science because we are creating the technologies and the future. And if they are only created unilaterally by a very homogenous group, they will not be fit for purpose. I mean, that for me is the bottom line. And again, I mean, if you talk about where we go next, I mean, Sheila, we talked about it because I asked about the panel. Obviously, you know, we're all women on this panel and we're talking about this topic, but this is not an issue for women. You know, it's not a women's issue, and it's not an issue for women to solve. And I mean, the reality is, if the system is not fit for purpose for girls and women, the system has to change, not the girls and the women. So, I mean, if there's issues from the beginning with stereotyping, as you say, Jocelyn, we have to address them. We have to talk about them, but it can't just be women talking about them. It's not our problem.
No, and absolutely. I'm very conscious of that. And when we did talk about the panel, we did talk about having some men on the panel. But a lot of people felt that women could say things about women in STEM that men couldn't. And I think that's really important. We need to be inclusive in the whole discussion. It needs to be a male and female discussion, not, you know, women just talking to women about these issues. And I suppose one of the things that I think is really important in talking to girls is that we need to emphasize that for girls, we want your brain for science, and it's the way you think. You know, it's not about, you know, how you look or things like that. It's really, you know, what you can contribute to science, and, you know, your brain is what what we need. And we need strong, independent girls who, you know, who will inquire and who will have the creativity and the inquiry and curious minds to do this. And maybe that does come back to the very beginning of, you know, the toys they play with.
Yeah.
There's interesting work by McKinsey's, a USA management company, research that shows that groups that are diverse are more robust, more effective, more flexible, more successful than groups that are monocultural, monosex, monocolor. So clearly, if you can manage a diverse group, it's going to be much, much more successful. And I think that's one of the strongest arguments we can use. But it does mean everybody needs good management training along with the science training.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
This is not about science doing girls and women a favor by letting them in. It's because science is going to be better with them in there. So it's, you know, so absolutely, I fully agree. But also, you know, we can't put the full burden of fixing this on the fewer women that there are in science and engineering already. And if we feel that there's a culture where men can't come and talk about these issues, then we also have to look at ourselves and say, well, are we part of that culture? Because, you know, maybe a man will come on a panel and will say something that we don't all agree with. And we have to be able to have that conversation without it kind of degenerating into a cancel culture, or that someone, you know, we should try and have those discussions, because otherwise we won't move forward.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting as well. I mean, even, you know, at the European level, you know, there is a lot more emphasis now in terms of, and this now would be really in the academic sphere, I suppose, where applicants are making, you know, putting in bids for funding and that kind of thing. You know, they now have to actually, as part of their research applications, take into account whether or not there's any, you know, gender considerations in actually what they're proposing. Because going back to an earlier comment by Ruth, of course, you know, history is littered with examples of where things have been designed or developed, whether it's in the medical area, or of course the one that everyone knows about is the, you know, the original design of seatbelts, where, you know, they were designed only considering, you know, the male perspective. So I think it is very encouraging that at that sort of level, the European Commission level, if you're looking for funding, you have to actually, you know, the researchers have to answer questions about whether or not, like, is there a gender dimension to this? Is there a sex dimension to this? And And I think actually, I know myself from within DIAS, working with the younger early career researchers, this is something they actually have conversations about in terms of actually when they're, preparing funding bids. So, all of these things contribute, I suppose, to different changes, to changes in mindsets. And I think it is important that within that academic sphere, because those people then are involved also in educating people and actually in lecturing to people, that actually, that those kinds of considerations become part of the thinking and feed their way through.
We just have a comment here from Catherine Mitchell, who says, a male postdoc said to me the other day, I wish they had taught me more about how to be a human in school and not just how to compute. And it's what a great thought. And basically the education is key. And I think that is such an important comment.
I think, as Jocelyn said, though, education from day zero almost, because there's formal education, and then there's the education that we get from this, what happens to us and how we're treated. And I suppose all of those things shape how we think about what we can do and our confidence and where we feel we fit. And then we know at those teenage years, people feel they should go where they fit. So by the time they've got to that stage, that's what they do. So we've a lot of work to do there. And I saw there was another comment, like, we've been talking about this for 30 years. And, I think that's true too. And maybe we have to start taking, some of our actions that I talked about there around CVs and funding, they were labeled as radical. We do the same, Eucharia. People have to address whether there are gender dimensions in their research before they come into us. But,
the research councils.
Yeah, these were labeled as radical things to do. I don't see them as radical at all, because the dial's not moving. So, and if we all believe, and again, I stress, not just women, but everyone in science, if we think science will be better if it's more inclusive, we all need to be thinking about this more. It can't just be the women.
That's a really good point.
It always strikes me, and this may seem like a small point. Sorry, I was just going to say, Sheila, that it always strikes me, that if we take an analogy from a different area, okay, so if we look at the fact that actually in the area of sport, for example, when you have the Olympics, or you have the European Championships, or you have some really big competition, right? And you have Ireland involved, or Irish participants involved, and it's the same in any country. They always say that after those kinds of, major events where there is success in sporting, you actually get a commensurate increase in young people actually joining clubs, whether it's to do football or to do running or whatever it is, because they actually see, whether it's male or female, the positive role models. So I think it just does strike me that sometimes I think we need to kind of almost look at other areas and look at other ways of actually getting people to look at women in particular in science, and see what they're doing. It's almost we need a campaign. I was struck by the fabulous work done by the Her Story initiative, telling the stories of women through the exhibition, but also there was then the TV series. So I think we need to kind of do a little bit of thinking outside the box, because I agree with the comment. I've been on this campaign trail for longer than I care to remember, as I'm sure many others have. And whilst there has been progress, I do think we do need to start thinking differently now around how actually we communicate the message. I think that's really, really important, because clearly what we're doing at the moment isn't actually breaking through as much as we would like, either in terms of ensuring that the opportunities are there, and just allowing people to to progress and engage in what they would like to engage in.
I'm just wondering, one of the things that has come across all day today is the idea of confidence, and giving people from across diverse backgrounds the confidence, to go into STEM, but also to succeed. And I wonder, is from the very young age, is that what we need to be, encouraging people to have confidence and to get over, the imposter syndrome?
I think we need to discourage 50% of the population and encourage the other 50%.
Yeah, I mean, I think someone made the point again that the sort of some of the words that we use in science around excellence and brilliance, you know, again, words kind of matter, because, you know, you kind of have is it the girls that work hard, but the boys are just brilliant, and you know, I think, you know, even again, you know, saying that girls need to be more confident, it's a bit like saying they're the problem. See, I don't think they're the problem. If we have a system where only highly confident, competitive people can succeed, then it's the system that's wrong, not the people. Like we all need some confidence to get on in life, but I think we just need to be a little bit careful about trying to say we change maybe even people's innate nature, because, you know, by definition, academics, you know, research is competitive. You are constantly being judged, you are constantly competing for funding, and you know, of course everybody can find that difficult, but surely, you know, for some people that will be much more difficult. So if we have a system that inherently is more difficult for some people than others, we will leave more of those people out as we go. So I just think we need to be a little bit careful about trying to fix the women, because you know what, we're actually all right, and we'll come as we are, quite frankly.
I'm just conscious we're coming near the end of the session. Could I just ask each of you your final comments on really what we need to do in this area?
Okay. Sorry.
Yeah, no, go on, Eucharia.
Okay, well, I think unfortunately it is a little bit multi-layered, and it's hard to summarize, and I suppose I'm going to be a little bit general in a way, but I do think in terms of I suppose let's because of the early education sphere. I mean, you know, very taken with some of what points that Jocelyn has been making. So clearly there is work to do there, but within the formal education setting, I do think we need to ensure that that the opportunity is there for girls to take up any science subject, regardless almost of what school they're in or where they where they are. We still haven't achieved that, and you know, it's such a basic thing, and there is lots of stats out there, you know, in terms of all of that. So it's clear we haven't done that. I think the other thing then, the really big thing for me actually is, and this maybe even goes back to the time when I was involved in Women in Technology and Science, obviously set up by the late and fabulous, great Mary Mulvihill. You know, the whole concept of role models to me actually is absolutely key and critical in terms of just having role models in the media, you know, out there, talking about their careers, talking about what they're doing, and you know, to me, it really does come down to that thing: you cannot be what you cannot see. I think as well the area around scientific literacy is important. I remember a number of years ago I did an interview for the Donegal Democrat, my home county. And I think I made a comment which then became the headline, which disturbed some people, which was something like, you know, science is the new arts degree. And I suppose the point I had been trying to make in the interview was that actually going forward into the future, science literacy is going to be very important for everyone, and for the future. So I do think there is actually more work that needs to be done just in general there, communicating the importance of science and how it really feeds into all of our lives. And certainly that's something DICE is trying to do, and I know SFI are trying to do, a lot of people are trying to do.
Ruth, could
Yeah,
you say?
I mean, look, I fully agree with all of what Eucharia said, but you know, I like I've been saying, I think, you know, these thinking about opening up more diversity. I mean, we should think about it quite broadly. So not just women, people of color, you know, or anyone that's not represented needs to come in, because this is going to impact on all of our lives. So we all need to actively do that. But I think as well, you know, this needs to be led from the top. You know, leaders in all sorts of institutions need to look at diversity, and they need to say this: we will be better if we are more diverse, and they need to have clear strategies in place to do that. and you know, obviously alongside, you know, we should all be, you know, remembering, you know, I'm lucky, I have a boy and girl, and you know, we need to not, when we see a girl go, oh, you look pretty, we need to say to them, what was the best book you read, or whatever. You know, we all need to start thinking differently about the boxes that we put people in.
That's a really good point.
Great.
And Jocelyn, can I give the final word to you on this?
It's really an extension of what Ruth has just been saying. We need to get better at spotting the subtle messages that limit diversity.
Yeah, eliminate unconscious bias. Yeah.
Wow. Unfortunately, we're just out of time, and I have to say, I think we really only just scratched the surface on this. I mean, I think this is something that we could have actually spent the whole day discussing. I mean, there's so many comments in the chat and suggestions, and you know, some great insights into where we should be going from all of our panelists. So thank you so much for giving your insights into all this. It's such an important area. And you know, things are improving, but I know, as people said, there is a lot more to do, and really it starts just at the very beginning, before any, you know, stereotypes come in. And I think it's, you know, it's up to us all to make sure that happens, and to work to ensure that that does happen. So thanks so much again.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Sheila. Thank you. Thanks for having me. Thank you.
No, thanks so much.